World War I is usually remembered as a nightmare of trenches, mud, and mass death. Images of artillery barrages and soldiers charging into machine gun fire dominate our understanding of the conflict. But beneath the visible destruction, another war was unfolding quietly and relentlessly. It was a war fought not with rifles, but with money. While soldiers paid with their lives, governments and financiers were fighting a parallel battle in vaults, banks, and accounting ledgers. Decisions made far from the front lines ended up shaping not only the outcome of the war, but the financial world that still governs everyday life today. By 1914, Europe was already strained to its limits. Political rivalries, imperial competition, and rigid alliances had created a fragile balance where a single spark could ignite catastrophe. Yet behind the speeches about honor and national destiny lay a far more practical problem. Modern industrial war was astonishingly expensive, feeding millions of soldiers, producing weapons at unprecedented scale, and sustaining entire economies devoted to destruction required sums of money no government had ever managed before. Choosing war was also choosing debt, whether leaders admitted it or not. At the outbreak of the conflict, most governments believed the fighting would be brief. Many expected victory within months and assumed traditional methods of financing would be enough. Taxes could be raised modestly, gold reserves could cover the rest, and citizens would donate or lend out of patriotism. These assumptions collapsed almost immediately. The war dragged on, costs exploded, and the old financial rules proved completely inadequate. Money vanished faster than anyone had imagined possible. Before the war, the global economy rested on the gold standard. Paper currency was supposed to be redeemable for gold, which limited how much money governments could issue and helped maintain trust. This system imposed discipline, but it also restricted flexibility. As armies grew and industries were redirected toward war production, expenses skyrocketed. Gold reserves that once seemed enormous suddenly looked tiny. Governments faced a brutal reality: obey the gold standard and lose the war, or abandon it and gamble on credit. One by one, the major powers quietly suspended the gold standard. This decision marked a turning point in financial history. Money was no longer anchored to metal but to confidence in the state itself. Printing presses replaced gold vaults as the foundation of war finance. This shift made it possible to fund the conflict, but it also unleashed forces that could not be easily controlled. Inflation, debt, and financial instability became weapons just as powerful as any army. Germany, cut off from international markets by naval blockades, relied almost entirely on its own population to fund the war. The government issued massive war bonds, selling them as acts of patriotism and civic duty. Ordinary citizens were encouraged to invest their savings in victory. For years, this system appeared to work, but it depended on one assumption: that Germany would win. When defeat came, the bonds lost their value, wiping out personal savings on a massive scale. The economic trauma that followed left deep resentment and instability that would haunt the country for decades. Britain approached the financial war differently. London was the center of global finance, and the British government could draw on a vast network of international credit. At first it relied on domestic borrowing and short-term instruments, but soon it turned abroad for support. The most important relationship formed was with the United States, although officially neutral. American banks became deeply involved in financing the Allied war effort. Loans, supply contracts, and financial services flowed across the Atlantic, binding America's economy to the outcome of the war long before it entered the fighting. France followed a similar path. With memories of past conflicts still fresh and its economy already under strain, France relied heavily on borrowing. Citizens were encouraged to buy government bonds, while large sums were borrowed from abroad, particularly from the United States. This dependency created long-term consequences. Victory did not bring financial relief, only the burden of repayment. The debts accumulated during the war would later destabilize politics and economics throughout Europe. Russia's financial situation was even more fragile. Despite its size, its economy lacked the infrastructure and stability needed to sustain prolonged war. Heavy borrowing, inflation, and repeated military failures shattered confidence in the currency. By 1917, the economic system was collapsing, and political authority collapsed with it. The revolution that followed was fueled not only by ideology, but by economic breakdown and monetary chaos. By the end of the war, the scale of spending was almost unimaginable. The sums involved exceeded anything the world had seen before, dwarfing pre-war national incomes. The old financial order lay in ruins. Inflation spread across Europe, savings evaporated, and trust in money itself was damaged. While ordinary people suffered, Those with access to information and power often shielded themselves by moving assets or adjusting ahead of the collapse. The financial war did not treat everyone equally. The aftermath of the conflict revealed how dramatically global power had shifted. The United States emerged as the world's leading creditor, holding vast gold reserves and financial influence. Europe, once dominant, was drowning in debt. Britain and France owed enormous sums to American lenders, while Germany was burdened with reparations it could not realistically pay. Financial leadership crossed the Atlantic without a single shot being fired. Attempts to resolve these debts only deepened the crisis. Reparations imposed on Germany destabilized its economy and triggered catastrophic inflation. Efforts to restore pre-war financial systems, such as returning to the gold standard, caused deflation, unemployment, and social unrest. International lending schemes created fragile cycles of repayment that collapsed during the Great Depression. The financial architecture built after the war was unstable from the beginning. What World War I revealed was not just the cost of modern warfare, but the power of financial illusion. Governments learned they could suspend hard limits, expand debt, and reshape money itself to survive crises. Citizens were taught to see borrowing as patriotism and sacrifice as duty. These lessons did not disappear with the war. They became permanent features of modern economic management. The patterns established during those years still echoed today. When authorities insist that inflation is temporary, that debt is manageable, or that emergency measures will soon be reversed, history urges caution. The financial battle behind World War I showed how easily money can be separated from reality, and how often the costs are transferred downward. The war ended more than a century ago, but its financial legacy remains deeply embedded in the modern world. Understanding this hidden struggle changes how we see both history and the present. The real battlefield was not only in the trenches, but in the systems that determine value, debt, and trust. Those systems continue to shape lives long after the guns fall silent. The lesson is not that money is meaningless, but that it is powerful, fragile, and often manipulated. And the people who understand that truth are rarely the ones sent to fight.